So initial taser design was set to be similar to the handgun because it would be easier for officers to learn since they already know how to fire a handgun and how to hold a handgun. If they made it similar, it would be easier for them to learn. But with that became an issue that they looked very similar to the handgun. So they started changing the size, the weight, and the color to try to differentiate between the two. What you need to remember is that even with the Supreme Court, they recognize that there are tense situations. They evolve very quickly for officers who have to make split-second decisions. And with that is the potential for an error to occur. So what has been a theory that has come out is called a capture error and slips. What that essentially means is that when you are in an incident that requires intense attention, that your body may automatically revert to a habit that you've practiced repeatedly. So, for instance, if I've drawn my handgun hundreds to thousands of times during my career, when I am in a situation that I have to make a quick decision, my body may automatically revert back to that. And how you would explain that to a person just who's not a police officer, it would be as if I grabbed a rental car. So I take a rental car out, and I automatically reach for a gear shift lever because I've done that so many times in my previous car, but the gear shift lever is not there. Or if I rearrange my kitchen, I may go to the same cabinet that the plates used to be in. So without this idea of this conscious thought, I'm automatically reverting back to a habit that I've practiced repeatedly. One of the things that was brought up is that other fields have researched this intently. So aeronautics and aerospace, the medical field, pharmaceuticals, they've all done research on how to prevent errors like this. And even according to the World Health Organization, there's approximately 150,000 deaths annually in the medical field. If you compare that specifically to the taser confusion issue, where someone grabs a handgun instead of a taser, that's only happened about 18 times since 2001. So in 20 years, 18 occurrences, so significantly less. The majority of our officers do, especially it's weighted toward patrol officers who are on the street all the time. Before anyone can carry it, they have to be certified. So they go through an initial course that's 8 hours long. Once they're certified with that, that includes practical. So they have to draw and fire the taser to show that they're proficient with it. They take a written test to make sure that they understand the concepts. They review our policy to make sure that they understand how we want them to use the taser and what's appropriate force according to our guidelines. And they also are exposed to the taser. So with that exposure, it gives them the benefit of knowing how the suspect would react potentially to that. They understand how the suspect would feel if they get that. They also understand that if the taser was used against them, so if someone were to take the taser and use it against them, how their body would react. So that's why some of the reasons we want them exposed to the taser during their certification. We do this certification regardless of if it's a new officer or an experienced officer coming from a different department. We want them to make sure that they are trained to our standards. So as they come here, they will go through the course by our guidelines so that they understand our policy and how we want them to use that.
And is that like an annual certification then with each officer?
So yes, after the initial certification, we do an annual recertification. That includes a policy review. That includes a practical portion as well, where they will again draw and fire the taser on a target, so we show that they're proficient. We talk about medical concerns on getting the person treatment afterward, and how to safely remove the probes. With that, we did change our program back in 2020, so last year we actually started incorporating more stress and making it more realistic training. So that includes multiple officers. Typically we would only deploy the taser if you had lethal cover. So if you had an incident, because we don't know the actions of the suspect, if they escalated very quickly, it can be difficult for an officer to quickly transition from a taser to a handgun if the person suddenly became a lethal threat. So we work then typically in teams with a lethal cover officer. And we've been doing that during our qualification now. As far as deployment in the field, we do, so when they're out there on the road all the time, we do have some mitigating factors. So it's been commonly referred to as cross-draw. What that means is we don't recommend, and it's actually prohibited by our policy, to carry the taser on the same side as the handgun. So if I'm a right-handed person, my handgun would be on my right side. My taser is going to be situated on my left side, so I have to reach across my body. And the thought process there is because it is a different mechanic, then you are less likely to have that taser confusion. Additionally, if we have these pre-planned events where it's not something that's very quickly unfolding, we will specifically assign officers a role of less lethal officer. What that means is if there's two officers and I say you're less lethal or you're the taser officer, they would have the taser out, and then you don't have this split-second confusion. They know their job is specifically less lethal, is specifically the taser. They would not have their handgun out. And so through those roles and responsibilities, you're less likely to have confusion. So if there was something that, like say it was an arrest, right? You may have 2, 3, 4 officers on this arrest team. So one would be considered lethal cover. They would have their handgun or maybe a patrol rifle if it's necessary. One person would have the taser, or sometimes we have a less lethal shotgun that fires an impact round. So that would be our less lethal option. One person would already know that they would be the ones going hands-free to do handcuffing, and then one person would be giving commands so that they have an overall picture, and then there's not confusion of having multiple officers give different commands. After this, we did talk, so I've already talked to my firearms instructors and less lethal instructors on how we can incorporate, because with any industry, when there is a situation like this, we want to know going forward that we're doing more. So now that this has been identified, I've talked to the firearms instructors, the less lethal instructors, on how we can change our training and even further adapt to try to prevent a situation like this. One of the other things that we're in the process of, we've already secured funding for a Milo training simulator. What this is, it's a use of force simulator that covers all of our use of force options, including just verbal de-escalation. So the goal there is to put our officers through there at least annually, if not twice a year, so that they can have stress put on them that I find it difficult to replicate with role players. Put stress on them so that they're making the proper decisions at the proper time. Then the instructors can debrief, have the person write the use of force report so that we ensure from the beginning to the end the whole situation is how we feel that, according to our policy, is justifiable. It's an inclusive system that has 3 screens, so you have a 180-degree field of view, so you're really put into the scenario. It's branching technology, so essentially they record a scenario with multiple outcomes. And the instructor, after they go through their instructor certification, can decide that how is the officer handling the situation. Are they de-escalating? And so the instructor will essentially respond to how the officer, or the instructor will respond to how the officer is behaving and either escalate or de-escalate the situation to see how they will handle that. Ultimately then, it will be debriefed with the officer to ask them how they felt they did, to see if they identified ways that they would have rather improve, and then the instructor will also debrief and say where improvements could be made.